Dark Souls 3 does not take place in a stable world. It exists in something temporary, a land that feels like it's slipping between states, between past and present, between life and death, between fire and the darkness waiting to replace it. Hey guys, Echo here, and welcome to Dark Souls 3 lore to sleep to. At the center of everything is the first flame, not just a source of light, but the force that defines reality itself. And, as it begins to fade once again, the world starts to collapse inward. You don't enter this world as a chosen hero. You are something lesser, something that has already failed. You are known as an unkindled, a being not fully explained, not fully understood, but there are clues. Fragments of truth scattered across the world suggest that the unkindled are what remains of those who once tried to link the fire, and could not. Warriors who reached the flame, but were found unworthy. And instead of becoming lords, they burned, reduced to ash, left behind. And now, for reasons never fully made clear, you rise again, not to succeed, but to clean up what others refused to finish. Your purpose is simple. Find the ones who once saved the world and drag them back to do it again. These beings are known as the Lords of Cinder. They are not legends. They are not myths. They are what's left of those who once sacrificed everything to link the first flame. Each one a ruler, a champion, or something far, far worse. Burned by the fire they once embraced, changed by it. There are 5 who must be found. Ludleth of Courland, a quiet, exiled lord, who alone did not abandon his throne. Aldrich, saint of the deep, devourer of gods. Once a man, now something that consumes even the divine. The Abyss Watchers, a legion bound by a single purpose, now locked in endless conflict with itself. Yorm, the giant, a ruler who once tried to protect his people, and failed. And finally, Prince Lothric, the one chosen to continue the fire, who simply refused. These are not willing participants. They have abandoned their duties, turned away from the flame, or lost themselves entirely. And yet, you are expected to bring them back, not to save the world, but to prolong its suffering. Because in Dark Souls, the question is never just what you must do, it's why it must be done at all. Before the world took shape, there was only stillness, an endless landscape of grey. Great stone arches stretched into the sky, forming the ancient arch trees, while immortal dragons rested above them, unmoving and eternal. This was known as the Age of Ancients, a time before change, before time itself had meaning. There was no life, and no death, no heat, and no cold, only a silent, unchanging world ruled by everlasting dragons whose stone scales made them truly immortal. Then, everything changed. Fire appeared. It is unknown how or why, but with the arrival of fire came something the world had never known before. Difference. Heat and cold, life and death, light and dark. For the first time, the world was no longer whole. It was divided from the shadows cast by this new flame in new beings. Not dragons, something else. Among them were powerful figures who would come to shape the future of the world. They discovered something within the fire. Great souls. Ancient, powerful, and transformative. 3 of these souls were claimed by those who would become lords. Gravelord Nido took the soul of death itself, becoming the first of the dead. The Witch of Izalith claimed another, along with her daughters mastering a powerful and dangerous flame. And Lord Gwyn claimed the third, rising as the Lord of Sunlight, surrounded by loyal knights. But there was one more soul, small, easily overlooked, the Dark Soul. This was claimed by a being history barely remembers, the furtive pygmy, and from this soul, humanity would one day be born. With their newfound power, the lords challenged the dragons. A war like anything the world had ever seen began. Gwyn unleashed bolts of lightning that tore through dragonstone scales, the very source of their immortality. The Witch of Izalith conjured massive firestorms, setting the ancient arch trees ablaze, and Nido spread death itself across the battlefield. creeping force of decay and disease. But the true turning point came from betrayal. Seath, the Scaleless, a dragon born without the protective scales of his kin, feared death. Unlike the others, he was vulnerable, and so he chose survival. He betrayed his own kind and sided with Gwyn. With Seath's vast knowledge, the dragon's greatest weakness was exposed, and one by one they fell. The age of ancients finally came to an end, and the dragons were driven to near extinction. In the aftermath of the war, a new era began, the Age of Fire. The lords divided the world amongst themselves. Nido descended deep underground, embracing death as a force to be spread across all living things. The Witch of Izalith returned to her domain, studying flame until it evolved into something new, pyromancy, a power drawn from the soul itself. And Gwyn built a shining city high above the world. Anor Londo is a radiant kingdom of gods. There, Gwyn ruled at the height of his power. He granted Seath the title of Duke and gave him access to vast archives where he would begin researching the secrets of immortality. From this research came sorcery, a new form of magic that would spread across the world. Meanwhile, the furtive pygmy faded into obscurity, but his legacy did not. His descendants, humans, multiplied across the world. Kingdoms rose, civilizations formed, and within every human existed a fragment of the dark soul. This is what gave humanity its unique nature, its ambition, its potential. Over time, the gods of Anor Londo came to be worshipped, not as rulers, but as divine beings. Religions formed around them, and humans, believing themselves lesser, became their followers. Gwyn stood at the center of it all, a king and a god. His rule was supported by powerful allies and legendary figures. Amongst them were Havel the Rock, a warrior with immense strength, and the primordial serpent King Sinker Frampt, a mysterious guide of the age. At his side stood his most trusted knights, Ornstein, the Dragon Slayer, Master of Lightning, Hawkeye Goth, unmatched with a bow, Lord's Blade Ciaran, silent and deadly, and Knight Artorius, who would one day face the abyss itself. Gwyn also shared fragments of his power. Seath received a portion of his soul, so did the rulers of New Londo. These gifts strengthened his kingdom, but also planted the seeds for future tragedy. And within this golden age, there were already signs of something darker, hidden bloodlines, forbidden experiments, and forces that even the gods did not fully understand, because even at the height of the Age of Fire, the shadow of the dark soul was quietly spreading. Over time, the fire began to fade. It did not happen all at once. There was no single moment where the world suddenly changed. Instead, it was slow, almost unnoticeable, but inevitable. As the first flame weakened, so did the gods. Their power, once absolute, began to slip. The light that defined their rule started to dim, and with it, their control over the world. But something else was happening at the same time. As fire faded, darkness grew stronger, and with it, humanity. The descendants of the furtive pygmy did not weaken like the gods. They adapted, they endured, they grew. This shift in power terrified the rulers of the Age of Fire, because it meant one thing: the world was changing, and not in their favor. In an attempt to stop this, the Witch of Izalith tried to do something unprecedented. She attempted to recreate the first flame, to artificially restore what was being lost. It failed, catastrophically. Instead of a new first flame, something twisted was born. The Chaos Flame, a corrupted imitation of fire, unstable, hungry, and alive in a wrong way. From it emerged the Bed of Chaos, a monstrous, uncontrollable force that warped everything around it. The Witch of Izalith and her daughters were transformed into grotesque forms, no longer rulers of the flame, but prisoners of it. And from this chaos came demons, creatures born not from nature, but from failure. The once great city of Izalith was destroyed. What remains was ruin, fire, corruption, and decay, a scar on the world that never healed. Only one escaped unchanged, Quailana of Izalith. She carried what knowledge remained and passed it on. Through her, pyromancy survived, not as a divine power, but as something human, something internal. Even then, the damage was done. The fire continued to fade. And so, Gwyn made a decision. He would not let the Age of Fire end. Gathering what remained of his strength, he left behind his kingdom, He entrusted Anor Londo to his knights and began a final journey, a march toward the very source of the flame itself. He reached the kiln of the first flame, and there he made his sacrifice. Gwyn offered his own soul to the fire, not a symbol, not a ritual, but everything he was. The flame was indeed reignited. For a time, the light returned. Age of Fire continued, but the cost was absolute. Gwyn was consumed, reduced to a hollow shell of what he once was, a burned remnant, a lord of cinder. His knights who followed him into the flame were also changed, their armor blackened, their purpose lost. They became the Black Knights, wandering remnants of a forgotten war. And despite everything, it still wasn't enough, because the fire began to fade again. This is when a new solution appeared, not from the gods, but from humanity itself. The undead, humans who could not truly die, marked by something strange. A symbol began to appear among them, the dark sign, a brand that bound them to life, even after death. Those who bore it would return again and again to bonfires scattered across the world. But each time they lost something, a piece of themselves. Without purpose, without memory, they would eventually become hollow, empty, broken, gone while still alive. There are those who believe this was no accident, that the dark sign was not a natural curse, but a deliberate one, a mark placed upon humanity by the gods themselves, a way to ensure that humans would never truly rise, that they would always return, always suffer, always be drawn back to the fire. Even the gods themselves may have contributed to it. Seath, the Scaleless, obsessed with immortality, sought to overcome death through knowledge. Brave Lord Nido governed death itself, yet twisted it in strange ways. Fragments of their influence can be seen in the curse. And then there are the serpents, ancient beings who claim to know the truth. One of them, Darkstalker Karth, tells a very different story. According to him, the Age of Dark was never something to fear. It was a natural order of the world, the next step. He claims that Gwyn feared humanity, feared what they would become, feared a future where the gods were no longer needed. So he resisted. He sacrificed himself, he prolonged the fire, and in doing so, he trapped the world in a cycle in which the fire is always fading, always forced back to life, a cycle where humanity is never allowed to reach its full potential. And now, the same choice approaches once again. As the fire continued to fade, not everyone sought to preserve it. Some sought to replace it. Among them were the primordial serpents, ancient beings who operate in the shadows, guiding events behind the scenes. Darkstalker Karth began to influence humanity directly, not to save the world, but to accelerate the coming of the dark. His influence reached a distant land, Ulasil, a kingdom known for its mastery of light-based sorcery, a place of beauty, knowledge, and curiosity. And that curiosity would destroy it. The sorcerers of Ulasil were manipulated, led to uncover something that should have remained buried, a being from the earliest age of the world, Manus, father of the abyss. Manus was not simply a creature, he was something far older, a primeval human, a living fragment of the dark soul. When he was disturbed, his humanity reacted violently. It did not remain contained, it spread, it consumed. From this eruption of uncontrolled humanity, the abyss was born. Not just darkness, but something deeper, something unstable, a force that twisted everything it touched. The people of Ulasil were transformed, not killed, but changed. Their bodies warped, their minds shattered. They became monsters. Centrally, Manus raged, grasping for something lost. He captured the princess of Ulasil, Dusk of Ulasil. With her, she pulled her into the abyss. In response, Gwyn sent his most elite warriors, the 4 knights, but even they could not withstand the abyss. It was not something that could be fought by strength alone. Only one stepped forward, Knight Artorius. Artorius made a desperate choice. He formed a pact with the creatures of the abyss, a way to resist its corruption, or at least survive within it. Armed with this protection, he entered the darkness, with the simple purpose to stop Manus. But the truth is far from legend. Artorius failed. He was overwhelmed, consumed by the very thing he sought to destroy. His body, his mind, his purpose, all lost to the abyss. History would remember him as a hero, but history is not always honest. Manus was eventually defeated, not by Artorius, but by an unknown figure, a presence that appears, accomplishes the impossible, and vanishes without recognition. When Manus fell, his power did not disappear, it scattered. Fragments of his soul scattered across the world, and from those fragments, new beings were born, the daughters of the abyss. This moment changed everything, because it revealed something dangerous. Darkness itself is not evil. Humanity, born from the dark soul, is described as something warm, alive, comforting. But when it is disturbed, when it is twisted, when it is forced beyond its limits, it becomes something else, the abyss. This pattern had already appeared before. When the Witch of Izalith tried to recreate the first flame, she created chaos instead, a distorted version of the fire. And now, when humanity itself was disturbed, created a distorted version of dark. The abyss corrupted everything, consumed everything. But even within it, there are creatures that endure, adapt, and live. This raises a question that the world is not ready to answer. Was the abyss truly the enemy, or just a reflection of something broken? While the chaos spread, Karth continued his work. He turned his attention now to another kingdom, New Londo, a city of undead. There he whispered to its rulers, the four kings. He offered them power, a way to resist hollowing, a way to preserve themselves. They accepted, but in doing so, they became something new, dark wraiths. They learnt the art of life drain, the ability to steal humanity from others, to take fragments of the dark soul and make them their own. This was not salvation, it was consumption and corruption. Kings fell deeper into darkness, their hunger grew, and their influence began to spread beyond control. Eventually, their danger became undeniable. The rulers of the world made a brutal decision. They flooded New Londo, an entire city, sacrificed, drowned beneath the water, its own people left to die, or worse. Those who remained became trapped, cursed, consumed by the dark wraiths. And once again, the world chose destruction. The world chose destruction over understanding what it feared. As the first flame began to fade once again, the world grew darker, not metaphorically, literally. The light of the sun was weakened. Day by day it dimmed, until shadows stretched across the land and refused to leave. And with this change, the gods began to disappear. Without Gwyn to lead them, their power diminished, their authority collapsed, and one by one they fled. They abandoned their great city, Anor Londo. What was once a radiant capital of divine power became empty, silent, a shell of its former self. Only a few remained. Dark son Gwyndolin, the last son of Gwyn, stayed behind, a god, Moonlight, raised in secrecy and bound to illusion, and deep within the archives, Seath the Scaleless remained as well. But by this point, Seath had lost himself. His pursuit of immortality had driven him into madness. Gwyndolin understood something the others would not admit. The Age of Fire was ending. But instead of accepting it, he chose to hide it. Using powerful illusions, he maintained the appearance of a world that no longer existed. Anor Londo still shone with sunlight. The gods still seemed present. Even Guinevere, long gone, was recreated as a radiant illusion. To anyone who arrived, nothing seemed wrong, but it was all a lie. To protect this illusion, and to preserve what remained of the gods' influence, Gwyndolin created a hidden order, Blades of the Dark Moon. They operated in secret, silently hunting those who threatened the gods or uncovered forbidden truth. With them, Gwyndolin maintained control over Anor Londo, not through power but through deception, and while the gods hid, the world below continued to decay. As the fire weakened once more, a new legend began to spread, a prophecy. It spoke of an undead, one who would leave their prison, journey to the land of the ancient lords, and decide the fate of the world. This land was known as Lodron, and the one destined to walk this path became known as the Chosen Undead. Whether this prophecy was truth or something carefully constructed is never made clear, but it served a purpose, because it gave direction to the undead, a goal, a reason to continue, and eventually, one of them succeeded. The chosen undead rose from the undead asylum and began their journey. They rang the bells of awakening, ancient signals that stirred long-forgotten forces, including King Seeker Frampt, another primordial serpent. Guided forward, they faced the remnants of the old world. They defeated the grave lord Nido, the embodiment of death. They overcame Seath, the Scaleless, now completely consumed by madness. They destroyed the bed of chaos, the last remnant of Isolith's failure, and they entered the abyss to confront the four kings who had become something far beyond human. From each of these beings, they claimed fragments of immense power, the Lord Souls, broken remnants of the original flame. With these, path forward was opened. The chosen undead reached the end of their journey, the kiln of the first flame. There they faced the husk of what remained of Gwyn. Not a god, not a king, just a hollow shell, a being that has sacrificed everything and lost it all. After defeating him, the chosen undead stood before the fading fire and made a choice, to walk away or to repeat the cycle. In this telling, they chose to sacrifice. They offered themselves to the flame just as Gwyn had done before them. Their body burned, their soul consumed, and in that moment they became something new, a Lord of Cinder. The fire was linked once again, and the Age of Fire continued. For a time, as fire rises, so too must it fade. This is not a failure, it is not a mistake, it is simply the way the world works. Ages pass, long enough for entire civilizations to rise, flourish, and vanish without a trace. Kingdoms are built on the promise of fire, and buried beneath its ashes. The land itself does not remain stable. It shifts, bends, pulls fragments of different eras together, as if the world is struggling to hold itself together. And through it all, the cycle continues. The fire begins to fade, and once again the undead are called. Some answer. They follow the path laid out before them. They gather strength, reach the flame, and sacrifice themselves. Their bodies reduced to ash, their souls consumed. In doing so, they become something small, yet essential. Fuel. Even their remains have purpose, reduced further into sublime bone dust. Fragments of those who came before, used to strengthen the very bonfires that bind the world together. But not all accept this fate. Some refuse. They reject the idea of sacrifice. They turn away from the flame and choose instead to rule. These undead carve out their own kingdoms. They build thrones, they wear crowns, they declare themselves lords, and for a time it works. Their power grows, their influence spreads, their names are remembered. Till the cycle catches up to them. Because no undead can endure forever, not truly. Even without death, there is decay. The mind weakens, purpose fades, and eventually they hollow. An irreversible state, not death, but something worse. A loss of self, a loss of meaning. And when that happens, their kingdoms fall with them. This is the truth of the world. No matter how powerful you become, no matter how long you resist, everything returns to ash. Even when the fire dies completely, it does not stay dead. Somehow, it returns. A spark in the dark, a new beginning built on the remains of the old. Darkness spreads, then fractures, then changes, taking on new shapes, new meanings, but never fully replacing what came before. This is a cycle. Not one of victory, not of progress, but of repetition. A perpetual fire and an endless twilight. Since the earliest age, power in this world has always gathered around certain figures, lords. But what truly makes a lord has never been entirely clear. It is not just strength, not just soul, not even sacrifice alone. Over time, pattern begins to emerge. Power is tied to symbols, objects that bind authority to the world itself. The first is the throne. A throne is not simply a seat of rule. It is a point of connection, a place where the will of a ruler becomes tied to the world they govern. To sit upon a throne is to shape the reality around you, to create a kingdom, not just politically, but existentially. The second is the crown. A crown is recognition, authority made visible. It marks the one who wears it as a true monarch, one whose rule is acknowledged and enforced. Together, throne and crown define lordship. They are not just symbols, they are anchors of power. And yet, there is one throne that stands apart from the others, the throne of want, a seat that represents something greater than any kingdom, greater than any single ruler. It is the throne tied to the first flame itself, to the point where the fate of the fire and the dark can be decided. And for all of history, it has remained empty, waiting for someone strong enough or desperate enough to claim it. Only in truth, the lords will abandon their thrones, and the unkindled will rise. Nameless, accursed undead, unfit even to be a cinder. And so it is, that ash seeketh embers. This is where Dark Souls 3 truly begins. Not with kings, not with gods, but with ash. The unkindled are not heroes. They are not chosen in the traditional sense. They are what remains after failure. Beings who once attempted to link the first flame and did not succeed. Where the Lords of Cinder endured the fire, the unkindled were consumed by it, reduced completely. Nothing left but ash. And yet, they rise again. When the first flame begins to fade to a critical point, a bell tolls, not to celebrate, but to awaken. From the graves scattered across the land, the unkindled return. They all rise in a place known as the Cemetery of Ash. A fitting name, because this is not a place of rest, it is a place of leftovers. Remnants of countless failed attempts to sustain the fire. Graves of those who gave everything and were forgotten. From here, the unkindled begin their journey. They are called many things. Ashen Ones, Champions of Ash, Unkindled, Undead. Every title points back to the same truth. They are not meant to be great. They are only meant to try again. There is a subtle but important distinction in this world. Ash and cinder. At first glance, they seem the same. Both are the result of fire. Both are what remains after something has burned, but they are not equal. Ash is what is left when something is completely consumed. Nothing remains, no structure, no strength. Cinder is different. Cinder is what remains when something resists, when it is not fully destroyed, when there is still something left to burn. This is the difference between the unkindled and the Lords of Cinder. The unkindled burned and were reduced to nothing. The Lords of Cinder burned and endured. They survived the linking of the fire, changed by it, marked by it, but not erased. This is why, when they rise again, they return as charred beings, still carrying the fire within them, while the unkindled return as something closer to human, empty, incomplete, searching. And that search is defined by one thing: embers. Embers are not just items. They are not just power. They represent something even deeper. A fragment of fire that still burns within a true champion, a reminder of what it means to endure the flame, instead of being consumed by it. The unkindled cannot create power on their own. They can only take it, borrow it, chase it. This is why embers are so important. They offer strength, vitality, a temporary return to something greater, but they also reveal something unsettling. The unkindled are not complete. They require something external to feel whole, to feel alive, and even then, it does not last. By the time of Dark Souls 3, this process is already repeated countless times. Generations of undead have come and gone, each one attempting the same task, each one feeding the same fire. Some succeeded, becoming Lords of Cinder, most did not. The world is filled with their remains, ashes scattered everywhere, bonfires fueled by the forgotten. Even the player is not unique in this. You are simply the latest. One more attempt, one more sacrifice. And this is reflected in what waits at the end, a being known as the Soul of Cinder. He is not a single warrior, but a collection, a manifestation of all those who have ever linked the fire. Every fighting style, every weapon, every strategy, all combined into one. Because in the end, individuals do not matter. Only the act of sacrifice does. There are many theories about what the unkindled truly are. Others believe they are tied to the bonfires themselves. But there are clues. When unkindled fall, they leave behind ash, proof that they have burned before. Proof that this is not their first attempt, and perhaps not their last. Unlike the undead of earlier ages, the unkindled are not immediately consumed by hollowing. They linger, they persist, but even this comes at a cost. To fully embrace the hollow state, they must accept something willingly, seek it out, take it into themselves. Even their decay is different. Just because they are not undead, they are what comes after. There is one final detail that defines the unkindled. They are forgotten. No songs are sung for them, no statues are built, no legends remain. Even when they succeed, their names vanish. A quiet reminder can be found in the music tied to the end of the previous age, nameless song. A piece that plays not in triumph, but in reflection, because the truth is simple. Countless warriors have already done this. They have fought, they have struggled, they have sacrificed everything. And in the end, they were reduced to ash, unremembered. And now it is your turn. Because whatever the unkindled truly are, their purpose has never changed. Find the Lords of Cinder, return them to their thrones, and decide whether the fire deserves to burn again. If the Lords will not return to their thrones, then let them return as cinders. To become a Lord of Cinder is to do what countless others could not. To reach the kiln of the first flame, to offer yourself to it, and to survive. Not unchanged, not unharmed, but still existing. This is what separates him from the unkindled. By the time of Dark Souls 3, 5 such beings remained, 5 who once linked the fire and lived through it. Their ashes are not symbolic, they are required. To relink the flame once more, all 5 must be returned to their thrones. As a reminder, our 5 Lords of Cinder, Bloodleth of Corland, a lord who did not run, who chose willingly to link the fire and never abandoned his duty. Aldrich, Devourer of Gods, a simple cleric. Once a simple cleric, but his hunger grew beyond control. He consumed men, then gods. He was so powerful, yet so unnatural, that he was chosen to link the flame. Even as the Lord of Cinder, his nature did not change. He continued to devour, grow, and dream something of working beyond fire. An age of not flame, but of something deeper. A dream. Around him, a following formed. The Sable Church of the Deep, a cult devoted not to light, to what lies beneath it. The Abyss Watchers, not a single being, but a legion, warriors bound together by a shared purpose. They consumed the blood of Great Wolf, linking themselves to a legacy, to Knight Artorias. They become guardians, hunters, of the Abyss. But over time, their unity became their downfall. The Abyss they fought began to consume them. And so they turned on each other, locked in an endless battle, a cycle within the cycle. Yorm, the giant, a ruler who sought to save his people, he faced a destructive force known as the Profaned Flame, and in desperation he chose to link the first flame. This did not solve the problem. His capital burned, his people were lost, and Yorm was left alone, king with nothing left to rule. Prince Lothric, the one chosen to continue the fire, the one destined to become the next Lord of Cinder. But unlike the others, he refused. He saw the truth, understood the cycle, chose to let the fire fade. Watching them from a distance, as the world approached its end, these are the ones you must find. Not heroes, not saviors, but remnant. Each one a different answer to the same question. What is the point of this cycle? Beneath everything, there is something else. Not fire, not the abyss, something deep. The deep was not always a place of horror. It was once described as calm, sacred, a resting place. But over time, it changed. It became a place where things were discarded, forgotten, buried. And in that accumulation, something new formed. Deep became filled with life, but not the kind that should exist. Insects that burrow into flesh, creatures drawn into living souls, masses that swell and move as if alive. It is dark, but not the same darkness as humanity. Humanity is warm, fragmented but alive. The deep is something dark, a darkness beyond understanding. There are those who believe the deep and the abyss are connected. Both are born from imbalance. When the Witch of Izalith tried to recreate the first flame, she created chaos. When Menace, father of the abyss, was disturbed, the abyss was born. And now, with the accumulation of corrupted souls, the deep has emerged. Another distortion, another consequence. There are signs of this connection. Weapons tied to the legacy of Knight Artorias, designed specifically to combat the abyss, are especially effective against those tied to the deep, including Aldrich and his followers, which suggests something unsettling, that the deep is not separate from the abyss, but perhaps another form of it, another stage or evolution of something that was never meant to exist in the first place. And like everything else in this world, it is growing. Not all Lords of Cinder were heroes, and some were never meant to be. Aldrich, Devourer of Gods, is one of the clearest examples of this. Before he became a Lord of Sidna, Aldrich was a cleric, a man of faith, but something changed in him. At some point, he developed a hunger, not metaphorically, literally. He began consuming human flesh, and not out of desperation, but enjoyment. There are accounts that describe his fascination with the act itself, not just the consumption, but the experience, the suffering, the final moments of life. This was not survival, it was indulgence. Over time, the hunger defined him. It is believed Aldrich became a central figure behind the cathedral, deep place that once held religious significance, slowly transformed into something else, a place of gathering, of worship, and sacrifice. Followers were drawn to him, some by belief, others fear. From the undead settlement, figures were sent along a path that would later be known as the Road of Sacrifices, a journey with no return. Many of them were consumed, but not all. A small number managed to escape. Among them were 2 children. One, Henry of Astoria. The other, Horace the Hushed. Their survival left a mark. Henry in particular carries a singular purpose, to hunt Aldrich and to end him. Because what Aldrich was doing was not just killing, it was systematic, endless. Bodies began piling up around the cathedral, so many that even Aldrich could not consume them all. Grave wardens were tasked with managing the remains, disposing of what was left behind, but even that became overwhelming. The cathedral rotted, not just physically, but spiritually. At some point, Aldrich changed again. His connection to Manus, Father of the Abyss, lineage of humanity, became distorted. After consuming so many humans, so many fragments of the Dark Soul, he was simply no longer a man. He became something closer to the Abyss itself, a being shaped by hunger, darkness, and excess. And yet, despite all of this, he was chosen. When the fire began to fade, Aldrich was made a Lord of Cinder, not because he was worthy, but because he was powerful. As Hawkeswood suggests, this was not a matter of virtue, it was necessary. Aldrich did link to fire. He burned, he survived, but becoming a lord did not change him, it only gave him more time and more hunger. After linking the flame, Aldrich began to dream. Visions of a future, not of fire, but of something else, an age of the deep sea, a world where the deep would rise and consume everything. In response, Aldrich adapted. If the age of fire was defined by gods, and removing them would hasten its end, so he began to devour them. Eventually, he made his way to Anorlando. There he was given a final offering, Dark Sun Gwyndolin, a god, one of the last. When you encounter Aldrich, this process may not even be complete. Part of Gwyndolin still remains, visible and struggling. Aldrich does not simply kill, he consumes, slowly, and while doing so, he dreams. In one of these dreams, he sees something unexpected. A young girl, hidden away and pale, a figure believed to be the crossbreed Priscilla, being connected to both divine and draconic blood. This detail is small but important, because it shows that even in his current form, Aldrich is not mindless. He is aware, thinking and planning. He is shaping himself for the world he believes is coming. And unlike the other Lords of Cinder, he does not resist the end of fire. He welcomes it, because in the world that follows, he intends to be at the top. Not all Lords of Cinder sought power, some sought an end. Yhorm the Giant was one of them, a ruler burdened not by ambition, but by loneliness. His kingdom, the profane capital, was tied to a flame unlike any other, the profane flame. This fire did not behave like the first flame. It did not sustain, it did not nurture, it consumed. Born under strange circumstances said to be triggered by a cursed woman tied to an ancient oracle, the profane flame spread with terrifying precision. It burned the city, reduced it to ruin. But what makes it truly unsettling is what it chose to destroy. It is said the flame incinerated only human flesh, selectivity, and through it all, those responsible continued to live, untouched, unchanged. Faced with this catastrophe, Yhorm made a decision. He decided to link the first flame, not for glory or legacy, but in the hope that doing so would finally put an end to the profane flame. But it didn't. His capital was still destroyed, his people were still gone, and Yhorm was left, a king who sacrificed everything and saved nothing. At the center of the undead curse is a symbol, the dark sign, a mark carried by those who cannot die, those who return again and again, but each return comes with a cost. Memory fades, purpose erodes, and eventually they hollow. This is why the undead are feared, why they are cast out, because their fate is not death, but decay, a slow descent into nothingness. One example is Horace the Hushed, once a loyal knight, but in time he loses himself, reduced to instinct and violence, a reminder that no one is immune. And above all of this, there is another sign, the eclipse. Visible above Lothric Castle as the fire fades, a dark circle resembling the dark sign itself. Its meaning is never fully explained, but it feels like a signal, a warning, or perhaps a call, a sign that the fire is nearing its end, or that someone is trying to prolong it once again. Throughout your journey, one place remains constant, Firelink Shrine, a hub, a refuge, a place that connects everything. But even this place is not singular. There are others, fragments, echoes. At the beginning you arrive from the cemetery of Ash. You awaken and make your way to the shrine. There, a sword is placed into the bonfire, the coiled sword, not a weapon, but a key. It restores the bonfire, allows travel and connection, but later you find something unsettling, a second shrine, the untended graves. Identical in structure, different in tone, dark and silent, as if the world has already ended. The shrine is still there, but its purpose is gone. Only a fragment remains, a broken piece of what once connected everything. And then, near the end, you arrive at one final version, the Flameless Shrine. Even more ruined, more empty, a place where fire no longer burns. From here, there is only one path left, forward to the kill. At the end of everything, the question remains the same. Not how the world began, not who ruled it, but why it continues. The fire fades again and again. Heroes rise, they struggle, they sacrifice themselves. And still, nothing changes. Kingdoms fall, gods disappear, humanity suffers, and yet the flame is always rekindled. Not because it should be, but because it can be. Dark Souls is not a story about saving the world. It's a story about a world that refuses to let go. A cycle built on fear, on control, on the unwillingness to accept an end. And you, the unkindled, stand at the center of it. Not even as a savior, not even as the chosen one, but as the latest attempt, one more ash seeking embers. And now, the choice is yours, to link the fire and continue the cycle, or to let it fade and see what comes next. Because in the end, the only thing more uncertain than the darkness is what happens when the fire finally dies. And so the fire fades once again, not for the first time and likely not for the last. Everything you've seen, every kingdom, every lord, every sacrifice, all leads back to the same moment, a dying flame, and someone standing before it. Throughout history, countless have made the same choice, to burn, to give themselves up so the world can continue just a little longer. But after everything, after all the lies, the suffering, the endless repetition, you have to wonder, is this a world worth saving? Or has it already been given too many second chances? Dark Souls never gives you a perfect answer. There is no clear, good ending, no true victory, only perspective. Maybe the fire should continue. Maybe darkness should finally take its place, or maybe the real answer lies somewhere beyond both. But one thing is certain, the cycle only continues because someone chooses to continue it. And now, that someone is you. So what will you do? Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.